2005, a single mother woke up to a tall, slender man standing between her and her bedroom door. She abruptly sat up, never taking her eyes off of him. But once the man noticed she was awake, he turned around and calmly walked away. For a moment, she froze, questioning if she'd just experienced a bad dream or maybe sleep paralysis, but she quickly determined that what she experienced was very real. Her immediate next thought was her children who were asleep in the room next door. However, by the time that she sprinted over, she found her kids still asleep with no trace of the man. From the kids' bedroom, she then heard what sounded like her front door creaking open and then shutting firmly, indicating that the man had likely left the house on his own. Still, she called the police, and the first thing that they told her was that this was far from a one-off incident. All across the town of Cape Elizabeth, locals had reported waking up to this man in their bedroom. He never seemed to steal anything or hurt anyone. He simply watched them sleep. Police began an intense search to find the man, but since most of the witnesses were only just waking up when they saw him and he never really left any evidence behind, it made it very difficult. Little was known about the intruder, but they did determine that he was likely in his early 20s and only entered homes with unlocked windows and doors. But after a few months of constant reports, he abruptly and mysteriously stopped. Despite neighborhood watch groups and numerous tips, the identity of the Cape intruder remains unknown to this day.
The house in this murder case was known as the most notorious crime scene in history. This is the disturbing case of Lizzie Borden. It was the 4th of August in 1892 in Fall River, Massachusetts. Inside his family home lay Andrew Borden, who was lying on his back on the sofa deceased. When investigators got to the scene, they found his daughter, Lizzie, was outside. She said she had been there at the time of the murder, but she was outdoors in the barn. But Andrew was not the only casualty that day. Inside the home, upstairs in the bedroom, lay another victim. This time it was Lizzie's stepmom, Abby. She was lay face down and rigid, having been struck and killed with a hatchet. Now, Lizzie's dad was a wealthy man, and the family lived in a very well-off area where crimes rarely took place. This made the news of the murders even more shocking to the local community. Suspicions soon fell on Lizzie, having been there, obviously, at the house at the time of the murders. Interestingly, she'd also never got on with her stepmom. Her dad had remarried after Lizzie's mum had passed away, and she made it obvious to her new stepmom that she didn't like her and felt like she was a gold digger. Tensions were reportedly growing, and Lizzie was also unhappy with her dad for his actions around money. He'd apparently started gifting Abby's family properties. Both Lizzie and her sister Emma had reportedly grown distant from her dad and stepmom. Now, when police spoke with her, Lizzie was reportedly quite rude and had an attitude. They also said that her story was really contradictory and she couldn't keep her story straight. She first said that she'd heard moans and groans from the house during the murders, and then she changed her story and said she'd heard nothing. Frustratingly, at the time of her questioning, she wasn't checked for any blood on her. Investigators also didn't thoroughly search her. They did find the murder weapon later on in the basement of the house. Interestingly, Lizzie was spotted burning a dress in the days after the murders. When she was questioned about this, she just said that she'd got some paint on one of her dresses and that's why she burnt it. Other people wondered whether there was a more sinister reason. Lizzie was arrested and put on trial for the double murder. Just 5 days prior to the trial, another brutal murder took place in the local area. A woman was hacked to death in her kitchen, and some were wondering whether a serial killer was on the loose and to blame for both murders. Now, interestingly, later on, a man called Jose was convicted of that murder, and it was determined not to be in connection with the Borden family murders. Lizzie claimed that she was not inside the house at the time of the murders for about half an hour while they took place, and one witness did reportedly see her outside of the house that day. The jury acquitted Lizzie, but many believe she got away with murder. Others believe that Lizzie's uncle John could have been responsible. He didn't see the family a lot and strangely stayed the night before the murders. He also had a suspiciously strong and well thought out alibi. After a man went missing in Pennsylvania, what police discovered was traumatizing. David Hittinger was a 37-year-old man living in Pennsylvania. His friend contacted police earlier this month after becoming concerned for his welfare. He was reported missing after having not been seen in an unusual amount of time. It had apparently been his birthday, so it was incredibly strange that he hadn't contacted his friends at all. A search began to try and find David on the 13th of May. He was apparently last seen 2 days prior to this. Police began searching in locations that they knew that David may have been. This included the new home that he'd just moved into. He'd recently moved in with a 33-year-old named Joshua Moser. What police found at the property was incredibly concerning. They found forensic evidence including hair and a large amount of blood. Horrifyingly, they also found a box cutter and a saw. There was also bloody clothing in the house. They then widened the search to the local area and tragically found several body parts in bin bags in different locations. Some were in the cemetery and some were in a quarry in Washington Township. It's reported that Joshua allegedly admitted to killing his roommate by strangulation. He's also alleged to have admitted hitting him in the head with a hammer. A motive is currently unknown. Joshua has been charged with criminal homicide, abuse of a corpse, and tampering with evidence. Imagine showing up to the school gates to find a student's severed head. This is the horrifying case of the Kobe child murders. It was the 27th of May 1997 in Tane-O-Hata. Just hours before students were due to attend school that day, the caretaker turned up and found something horrific. A special education student's head lay severed by the gate of the elementary school. The victim was John Hayes, aged just 11. He'd gone missing days prior. He'd been decapitated with a saw and a note had been shoved in his mouth. This stated, "This is the beginning of the game. Try to stop me if you can, you stupid police." It talked about wanting to take more victims and how, for the killer, this was a thrill. No one had any idea who could have committed such a brutal crime. Days after the killing, a local newspaper received a letter. The author claimed responsibility for the brutal killing. They also threatened to take more lives. Killer stated, "It's only when I kill that I'm liberated from the constant hatred that I suffer, and that I'm able to attain peace." The media actually ran a story about this and pronounced the killer's name wrong, which angered the murderer. He then sent another ominous message to the newspaper. This stated, "From now on, if you misread my name or spoil my mood, I will kill 3 vegetables a week." And by vegetables, he means humans. "If you think I can only kill children, you are greatly mistaken." Now, the murder victim's body was ultimately found on a hill known as Tank Mountain. It transpired later that the killer had lured the little boy there, telling him he'd seen a giant turtle. He killed him, severed his head, and then took it to the school. But this was not the killer's only victim. Earlier in February that year, he launched a brutal attack on 2 schoolgirls. Both thankfully survived, but the following month, another victim was not so lucky. On the 15th of March, 10-year-old Ayaka Yamashita was struck from behind with a hammer. She tragically passed away from her injuries. Now, police were frantically searching the local area for any clues as to who could have committed this crime. Finally, there was a breakthrough. They found a knife. This knife was located by a local schoolboy's home. The 14-year-old junior high school student was then apprehended and ultimately did confess to these brutal killings. No one could have predicted that the person responsible for 2 murders had been a child. Officers also discovered that there were details of the first killing in this schoolboy's secret diary. Due to his age, at the time his identity was kept hidden. It was later released that his name was Shinichiro Azuma. They conducted handwriting analysis on this boy and compared it to the letters that had been written to the newspaper and found that it was in fact the same person. He was imprisoned at the time, but apparently has now been released and is living in Tokyo. A parole officer never returned to work after doing a routine check. What had happened to him was the last thing anyone expected. 54-year-old convicted S offender Emmanuel Edward Sewell lived in Maryland. Now, he had a dark criminal past and had spent many years in prison for R. Back in 1996, on Halloween, he'd broken into a man's house through the downstairs open window. He threatened him at knife point, then tied him up, and then SA'd him. He then stole the man's bank card, his video recorder, and also his car. Now, he was on probation and was having regular checks from parole officers. On the 31st of May 2023, parole officer Davis Martinez was due to go and check on Emmanuel. When his colleagues never heard back from him that day, they got increasingly concerned. It shouldn't have been taking him as long as it was. They decided to send over some backup and just see what was going on. They had absolutely no idea of the horrors they would find. Police showed up to Emmanuel's apartment in Chevy Chase to see all of the blinds and curtains closed. They called out and no one appeared to be home, but they knew that this is where their colleague had been. They decided to force entry into the home, and what they found behind the door would traumatize them. Their colleague was dead in the fetal position underneath the bed. He was wrapped in plastic, and nearby was a bloody towel. He'd been stabbed in the head, neck and face. Now, investigators started interviewing neighbours to put a timeline together of what had gone on here. One neighbour reported hearing knocking at Emmanuel's door at about 9 a.m. The neighbour reported then at a later stage seeing Emmanuel leave the property and quickly return. He was also allegedly spotted driving off in his car with clear bin bags full of clothing. Emmanuel has been arrested and has been charged with second-degree murder. This is the unsettling evidence that was found after a woman vanished off a cruise ship. It was December 2004 and Annette Mizner was 37 years old. The mother from Wisconsin had actually won a 9-day cruise to the Mexican Riviera, so she was obviously thrilled. She boarded the ship with her parents and her 17-year-old daughter Danielle. However, on the 4th of the month, things turned from a dream to a nightmare. Annette left her room to meet up with her parents as planned at 10 p.m. to go to bingo. Worryingly though, she never showed up. Her dad was concerned and heard rumours that she'd been spotted around 7:30 at the casino. He went to try and find her but had no luck. He then heard over the intercom that a bag had been found. It turned out to be Annette's bag, and it was recovered from the railings on a lower deck of the ship at around 10:10 p.m. Beading from her handbag was all over the floor, which indicated signs of a struggle. Then came the most worrying discovery of all. A CCTV camera had been covered with paper. It was as if somebody was deliberately trying to cover over the cameras so nothing was seen. Annette was declared missing, and a Coast Guard aircraft and Navy ship searched the area for 16 hours. Tragically, they failed to find the missing mum. Now, Annette's daughter Danielle actually claimed a strange man had been harassing her mum, and they'd reported it to staff, but nothing had been done. Annette's husband feels that she may have fallen by accident or could have been pushed overboard. Her fate remains a mystery to this day. This is the terrifying image of a woman cowering on her rooftop, trying to escape an intruder when he pops up behind her. What happened to this woman is like something off a horror film. It was September 2014, and Melora Rivera was at her home in California. Unfortunately for her though, she was not home alone on the day in question, although she was initially unaware of this. Melora worked as an actress and actually had a part in the Whitney Houston film Sparkle. She was in her bed when she noticed somebody in her property. He had apparently broken a panel to reach inside and unlock one of the doors. Terrified, the woman tried to escape onto the roof to alert authorities. She managed to balance up on the roof and ring 911 before, terrifyingly, he jumped up and appeared behind her. This image was captured by a passerby. Thankfully, police arrived on the scene and the man was arrested. He was identified as 29-year-old Christian Hicks. He was swiftly arrested and the woman was rescued off the roof by the fire brigade.